This video will have full spoilers for Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. This is going to be the only warning. So last night, I ended up beating Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. So big shout out to Epic Games and Square Enix for providing me the game early so I can get this video out in time for you all. And wow, okay. There were a lot of different things that was going through my mind throughout the entirety of this experience. Not only was I felt like we were being told one thing, but another thing was actually happening behind the scenes. There are so many different variables that make up this story and this overall experience. So let's go first, let's get this out of the way right at the beginning. I think this story is the best story outside of Final Fantasy XIV that Final Fantasy has told since Final Fantasy IX. Yes, I like this story by the end better than Final Fantasy X. I liked it more than, I hadn't played Final Fantasy XI. I haven't played 12, so those aren't factors for me. But I liked it more than the entire 13 series as a fan of at least the later two games of those series. And I liked it overall more than Final Fantasy 15, but there are of course a little bit of explanations for that. 15, while I'm a major fan of it, at the same time I also feel from just the game you can't get the full story. Again, a lot of times to get full context for things and get the entire full experience of 15, you have to watch the anime, you have to watch the movie, you have to read the book that actually has the real ending of this actual story, because again, there was going to be more DLC after the fact of Final Fantasy 15, but those ones ended up getting canceled and its content actually ended up becoming a book. So as somebody that owns the book and hasn't actually read it, I don't really know how 15 ends. And I feel like most people that have played 15 are probably in a similar situation as me. But again, the fact that I have to do that in general kind of lowers it in that fact just because of that. But again, Final Fantasy IX was actually the first Final Fantasy that I actually ever played and beaten. And it was a crazy experience for me. And again, it's honestly been a ride ever since. And this game truly felt like it was telling something just as grand as that. Now, where really things ended up kind of being messy here was how they executed it. And this is where I feel a lot of people's differing opinions are going to come in. Some people will probably feel that because of how they execute it, regardless of what the story is actually saying, because of how they try to execute it, things being in different orders, we don't have full context when we do see scenes. You know, it's one of those scenes, it's one of those games where when you look at a scene, there are multiple things happening, and to actually have the context of what's going on, you have to see a cutscene later on during its reveal. Then you'll be able to go back and see this cutscene and truly understand what's going on. Now, some people don't like that kind of thing, but as a Square Enix fan, I am used to this. I have been conditioned to be okay with this. So that kind of thing doesn't truly bother me. For me, it kind of added to not only the grandiose scale of what the story was trying to tell, it also made me aware, hyper aware of everything that was going on throughout the entire game, even when I was, just actually playing it in the gameplay, because a lot of people don't realize this, but there's actually a lot of dialogue during combat and stuff as you progress through each dungeon to dungeon. And during that dialogue, a lot of times they give you greater insight into characters, and while you're exploring the levels, which I really love doing, honestly, it was probably one of my favorite parts of the game, how explorative the levels actually were and how vast they became. Towards the beginning of the game, they weren't that vast, but there were still things to find. And a lot of these Lufinian logs and the Fool's memoirs, they were some of the best reads of the game. Now, even though I said this is going to have full spoilers, I won't go into all of it because I don't want this video to replace, that experience. I do think that some things should be just experienced for yourself, and I really do want all of you to play this game. That's one thing. If that's what you're here to see, get this game. Get the game. Don't question it. If you're a fan of anything Square Enix has done in recent years, then this will be a game for you. I genuinely do think so. So get the game. It's out on the Epic Game Store. It's out there on PlayStation, Xbox, whatever you have. It's on there. So go ahead and check it out. Now, this is where we're going to get into more of the nitty gritty of the story. So in the end, it seems like this game was not a retelling, of Final Fantasy 1. That's not what it ended up being. In the end, it actually ended up making itself out to be a prequel to Final Fantasy 1, which is what some people initially thought of it being. But in the end, most of the game, it didn't really seem like it was going to go that route. A lot of the game, it did seem like it was a retelling. A lot of the experiences, the bosses, the locations, they were all places that already existed in Final Fantasy 1, and we treaded the same waters. To anybody, who's played that game, we treaded those same waters. We've been there, done that, just in a new way. However, because of the whole time loop situation in Final Fantasy 1, it ended up being the story of how all of this started. It wasn't about Jack ended up being somebody who wanted to kill Chaos. He ended up being somebody who had to become Chaos, and his friends along the way were conditioning him, throughout everything that we were going through. They ended up in the end conditioning him and pushing him to become Chaos. And that was one of the craziest parts to me, because I kind of reacted when they all started fighting him and attacking him. That was probably the reaction that he had, is kind of how I kind of reacted. It's like, what are you guys doing? Because when they kind of started turning around him, I was like, okay, what's going on here? And then they go out and attack him, and I'm like, what's going on here? But it wasn't long before when I realized, you couldn't die in the fight, and they were all attacking me. These guys are my friends. They would not just attack me out of nowhere. They're not going to go turn, on me, even though when things look bleak. They have no reason to, I know earlier on in the story, they kind of hinted that there being a traitor amongst them, because there's only supposed to be 4 warriors of light. And that kind of made me feel like, what's going on here? Maybe did they think Jack was a traitor? But they were talking in, a pleasant way. Like they were trying to egg him on to accept the darkness and stuff like that. And I was just completely unaware of what was going on. But they were really just trying to sacrifice themselves and be that motivation and that added despair that Jack needed. Not only did the person that he loved end up dying, right in his arms, but now he lost all of his friends. And now he honestly just kind of hates this world for getting him in this situation. It's just like, at the end of the day, the Lufinians, they have complete control over this world. And because of that, they can literally just reset the world whenever they want. And they've done it before. That's why all of these things, don't end up making sense, or why we don't have context for some things. This has happened before. This has happened numerous times. This is a loop. They have been going and redoing this adventure over and over and over. And the game doesn't actually let you know how many times they've done it, but they let you know that this is, at that point when they turn on him, that was the, farthest they had ever gotten alive, And in the end, when Jack's finally becoming Chaos, and he has to fight despair, itself to make its darkness part of himself, the Lufinians are over here wondering, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And Jack has just had enough. He's honestly had enough. And I can't blame him, because, these Lufinians just treat the people that he cares about as nothing. And in the end, they don't really care about Cornelia anyway. It seems like Cornelia, it may just be an experiment, but at the end of the day, the Lufinians are not afraid to throw that experiment away, when they're ready to move on. That's the thing, because they already hate humanity as it is, despite our main crew mainly all being comprised of Lufinians outside of Neon anyway. But the thing is, Jack had enough. He truly just had enough. He became the one thing that they couldn't control. No matter how vast and ever expanding their technology ended up being, Jack became the one thing they couldn't control, the one thing that could infect everything that they were doing, and that was chaos. And in the end, it said that they had split themselves from the timeline. So now the Lufinians are just gone. So that's how my take of it ended up being. The Lufinians themselves cut their society off from the rest of the world. And now the timeline in which Jack and all of them have been going throughout the game, they're completely disconnected now. However, they did still reset the world because, again, everybody was dead and they didn't want to leave the world like that. So they obviously did have to do something about it anyway. So the world got reset. But now Jack is chaos. And in the end, what was so crazy, going back to the whole there being 5 Warriors of Light, back then, you know, whenever they make Warriors of Light a thing prevalent in the story, except for 14 because it's a little bit different as an MMO, there's always 4. So there being 3 or there being 5 always felt a little off-putting to me personally. And because of that, I thought something was going to play into it. That's why I bought into the whole traitor thing that they kind of touched on earlier on. I didn't know who it would be, but because they did that, and already me having an uneasy feeling about being more than 4 Warriors of Light, I didn't like that. But that ending came out and it showed Jack on the throne, and then it showed the 4 fiends walk up, and then when it switched angles, it showed them as their friend counterparts. I lost it. I lost it. Everything. It's like my brain expanded. That was why there was more than 4. Because Jack is chaos and he has his 4 fiends, dude. And they were the ones who worked to got him there, just like in Final Fantasy 1. They were the ones who set him up to be able to do this in the first place. It all made sense. Everything in the story had context. Everything from how they acted because of the amnesia and everything, you know, not knowing what to do, but they still have residual memories of each other and of their experience. That's why they were so quick to buddy up and stuff like that. All of that had explanations. The awkward dialogue, you know, the sudden, blossoming friendships, you know, the hardships, the experience they have, you know, in combat and etc. All of that added up because they've done this before. They've done this multiple times and they keep doing this, and everything had context for it. And it goes even deeper in the Lufinian logs, which again, I don't want to spoil all of it, but again, you could find out about the Lufinians honestly long before they really start bringing them up in the story normally. Seeing those logs was really just showing the disgust. And honestly, it only feels disgusting if you're really thinking of, you know, in place of the player character. And while Jack was a Lufinian, we didn't know that at first. It really feels disgusting as a Cornelian, you know, that they're just treating humanity as experiments. And that really sucks because we always known the Lufinians since Final Fantasy 1, they were an advanced civilization of people who lived in the sky, but we didn't know the extent of their technology. We did not know that. You know, we just assumed that, oh, well, you know, the Lufinians had technology, Jack has a phone, so, you know, maybe he's just, you know, maybe just everybody has phones in this universe, you know, especially since nobody really questioned his phone in the first place, you know. But at the same time, I guess now Jack having a phone and Jack being Lufinian actually makes sense, you know, and he's one of the senior advisors there, you know, he was one of their highest ranking officials working there, you know, and the fact that strangers were all, you know, a job that they were due. They were the ones sent out back into Cornelia. And that just kind of blows my mind. And again, that makes the whole moniker of the game make sense. Strangers, that's our team of Paradise, and the Paradise being Lufinia. Most of these people are from Lufinia. Blows my mind. It honestly blows my mind. Oh man, it just, there's so much I want to say, so much I want to continue on with, but I can't dwell on one topic for too long or else this video will be freaking 10 years old. However, I don't think every aspect of the story was all sunshine and rainbows, if you catch my drift. And the main thing I felt about that was actually something I was going to talk about throughout this video, and I actually technically did record a different video, but I'm re-recording this because I actually found out that this could be changed. One big flaw throughout these cutscenes for me personally was because you have to have these stupid looking headgears on during cutscenes. So forgive me during this video if you see stupid headgears on during an emotional scene or something, but it was because I didn't realize in the settings you can actually choose to not show the headgear, and I did not realize that. I wish there was an option in the actual menu because I play Final Fantasy 14, and in your character, you know, customization menu, you're able to choose to not display the headgear. So that's where I was looking for that option throughout this entire game, but I never saw it. And so I just assumed it didn't have it, but it was actually in a completely different menu in the settings menu under basic. And so, I mean, I guess that's a basic option I would like to see in this kind of game, but I guess it, overall makes sense now. But if you're going to play this game whatsoever, make sure you check that off, because again, you'll be wearing scary Oni masks and all these other kind of weird visors and stuff like that. And it honestly just gets in the way. I tried to make sure I was wearing like a headband or maybe just a mask or something like that that just covers like the nose and mouth, as much as possible. But still, it really did, ruin some scenes for me, or at least lower my experience, especially towards the end when Jack had to kill his friends. He had that stupid full out Darth Vader dollar store mask on, and I hated it. I hated that. And I literally had to be like, no, I hate this. And that was literally right before the final boss. I figured that out, that you could take it off. I hated myself for that. But now let's get into the gameplay, which is probably something that most people were probably going to go into this game wanting. But the gameplay is extremely solid. I'd even go as far to say this is probably my favorite action gameplay style in the entire series. I'm not going to say necessarily that it's my favorite battle system in the entire series, as again, I am a turn-based nut. I really love turn-based combat, and especially right off the cusp of finishing Final Fantasy VI, I really love me some turn-based right about now. I love Final Fantasy XIV's combat. I feel it's the most in-depth combat system in the entire franchise. Is it my favorite? I'm not too sure. I haven't experienced every game yet, but I do think out of, especially like in comparison to 7 Remake and Final Fantasy 15, as those are the two other main action-oriented Final Fantasy games, I would still say that I think that Stranger of Paradise has the better combat system, mainly just because, I guess if you want to compare them all back and forth, Stranger of Paradise actually has the job system. I'm a big fan of the job system because it not just changes, aesthetically what you're using to fight people and changes combos, but it changes how your stats and overall progression works for characters. Not only is the job system intact, but it also has, it's not just a simple progression like you'd see in Final Fantasy 3 or something. It has a full out skill tree. And I feel, again, if you're going to include any kind of jobs or progressions of characters, I truly think skill trees are like the definitive way, and at least in so far a lot of these modern games, in how you can really have characters progress. Because if you're going to make my character evolve over time, then I'd like to have some control in how that character grows. I feel a skill tree would work in most level-based games, purely just because I'd like to be able to see what I can do. And say if I have these 2 job points, I can choose to say do more I could choose to do more damage with my physical attacks, or I can choose to, have more HP. That's an equal trade-off to me. If me personally, instead of the game deciding, oh, you just leveled up, so now you get 10 more HP, I'd like to be able to decide what's more important to me. As somebody who takes a lot of damage and stuff in games, I would probably choose to take less damage than more HP, because I can always heal more HP with potions or something, or use cure. But, overall, it's less restrictive. If I just take less damage, I take less damage. It don't even matter about anything anymore. I just take less damage. And I feel like that's overall more valuable in an action-oriented game personally. So, and even not just in an action-oriented game, in a turn-based game, that I feel like that would be great as well. Of course, you also have spells and stuff like Protect and Shelka, which make you take less damage. But again, that restricts me to a class I need to have equipped in order to have that benefit. And I guess some of the skills work the same way in this game, but still. Overall, I found myself throughout most of the game, I had whatever class as my second, and my first class that was always equipped was Mage. And I kind of explained this before back in the demo, but the main reason that I stuck with Mage for so long was because of its magic ability. The magic ability basically lets you recover MP while you're casting. So as long as I was attempting to cast a spell, I would gain MP. Now again, of course, you can gain MP by parrying attacks, and you could parry practically everything in the game as long as the icon or the color scheme of the attack isn't red, you can parry it. Of course, some attacks were easier to parry than others, but still, you were able to parry practically everything in the game. And that was an easy way to build MP, as you would gain more meter when you did so. Of course, you can still have your break gauge ended up being broken, which would leave you vulnerable to attack, which will happen. But at the end of the day, I still found that to be really essential, because sometimes it was hard to get up in the mix with some of these bosses and even sometimes enemies, because it's hard to focus on parrying and getting the timing down when you're overwhelmed by a bunch of different enemies. And that gets really hard to do when, you get later into the game, when they start throwing so many enemies at you in narrow corridors. That was probably my least favorite thing about the level design of some of the later levels, was how narrow the corridors were and how many enemies populated them. I personally am not a fan of highly populated narrow corridors in any game. I genuinely don't like that, because again, it limits how I have to fight in these situations. And I do feel limitations during gameplay is a good way to make players be able to get better at the game, because it makes me not have to approach scenarios the same way every time. It's a good way to mix things up and force you in bad situations so I can overall learn how to get out of it. And I understand the type of design. That I do think that is good game design. But I personally am just not a fan of it, because a lot of times I find myself dying when I don't have to. Like a lot of times I'm fighting one enemy, then I get stabbed with a spear from behind. I don't like that. Even playing in multiplayer, it was kind of crazy. But I loved exploring the levels. Me and my friends, when we would play the game, we would literally just explore. We were trying to find the tonberries that was in there. We were trying to find every chest. We were trying to find the Lufinian logs. We were trying to do everything. Honestly, we were just getting lost in these levels. And by lost, I do mean both ways. I literally was getting lost inside the levels because the game does not have a map of any kind. And I was just overall getting absorbed, emotionally into these levels, purely just because the music was great, the levels were beautiful, and I just overall feel like they expanded what the Final Fantasy worlds were like in their own original games. Being able to be in the Final Fantasy 15 base level was absolutely astounding. I feel like we got to explore more there than we did in actual Final Fantasy 15, and it was beautiful. It was honestly truly beautiful. I do feel like some of the enemies kind of got cheap towards the end, but I overall really liked it. I do think that for some reason later on, the missions really start expecting a lot of you. Like sometimes the recommended battle level would be like, equipment level would be like 88, and then the next mission it's like 100, and it's like, dang, I gotta be that much stronger for it. And I guess that makes sense, but sometimes it would go up by like 20, and then it's just like, dang, dude, I started feeling like I was lower every time. Sometimes, like me and my friend Avatar Yaya, we were getting bodied so bad. One time, I don't want to say the name of the level, even though I said this is full spoilers, purely because, again, some people don't want to know about the in-depth each of the levels. But there was one of the later levels. It was an all-white area. And in that area, we were just getting destroyed by everything. Now, it's because most of the game didn't have enemies that were weak to holy. Of course, they were around, but it was usually one enemy at a time. But it felt like everything was weak to holy around here. And because, we weren't really having the setups for holy-based enemies a lot, we had to really try to work our way around it. And even then, we were still getting bodied because of how the level design really played against us. And honestly, we just decided to run. I said, we'll deal with the consequences of our actions when we get to the boss. And little did we know, we would beat the boss first try. And I enjoyed it. I honestly thought the bosses were a big highlight of the game. Now, this is something that I did want to bring up here in this video, and I'm doing it about half an hour in. The thing about the bosses in this game in particular, though, that some people were saying they liked, and I've got to admit, these are not the de facto action RPG bosses. I'm going to say that right now. If you've played Kingdom Hearts or anything like that, or even Final Fantasy VII Remake, I do think the bosses in those games are actually better. But, or DMC or Bayonetta, all those other action games, I do feel have better bosses. But what I loved about the bosses so much, though, was the setting. The setting was always really well done. They always felt so daunting. They felt like they had a clear advantage over you no matter what the situation was. The music was often great too. So it was like such a conflicting amount of emotions. I'm so in the zone because the music and setting are so going hand in hand with each other. But at the same time, I really hate in action-based games when enemies don't stagger, or I mean naturally stagger, I should add. And by that, I mean how the bosses work in some action games is when you attack the enemy, but they stand still. They're in real life, if you were to punch somebody, you would see them recoil from, the attack. If you punch me in the face, I'm going to act like I just got punched in the face. But in some action games, that's not always the case. And I completely understand that's something you got to animate. And in a way, some people might think that's going the extra mile. But I think it is going the extra mile in terms of game feel. I feel that enemies should constantly stagger when you're attacking them. I'm not saying that they need to stagger and you just completely overpower them, but I feel like in terms of game feel, I think every boss should act like they just got hit. And in Stranger of Paradise, they don't do that unless you particularly get a critical hit or activate their weakness or things like that. And while I do think it's something better, I guess in terms of, say, another action game that came out not that long ago with Tales of Arise, I do think the bosses are better than Tales of Arise. I do think it was something I would have liked to see better. Like if they were to make another action-based Final Fantasy game spinoff, I would prefer, or even in Final Fantasy 16, I really hope the bosses stagger and act like they're being hit when they're being hit. It wasn't too big of an issue, and it was something I definitely got used to, but sometimes it can mess up your flow and response time when you don't necessarily know how they're going to act, because sometimes they'll just completely move, when nobody would move like that after just being hit. So I do think it would add a lot to go and further, dive into that kind of thing if they're going to make another action-based spinoff or even in the next action-based mainline game. But overall, I thought the bosses were still great. They were very daunting, including the final boss, which I thought was really, really it was really good, but it was really frustrating at the same time. Maybe just because I lost over 30 times. But the reason I felt it was also really tough was because I had to do it I had to do it single player. And the thing about my experience with the game, I played a lot of the missions single player, but I also played a lot of them multiplayer. Sometimes I would replay levels multiplayer after having done them single player, or vice versa. But for story reasons, because Jack killed his friends, you had to be by yourself when you fought Chaos, or when you fought the incarnation of despair itself. You had to be by yourself because there was no one else left. I think it was better that it was single player, but I wished it was multiplayer. Maybe just have a few more Jacks in there. It makes sense for him to be alone, but I really missed teaming up with teammates, because when you die and that's it, even though you had potions left, that really sucks, because being able to rely on potions and Phoenix Downs is a really good thing in that game. And I really like how the multiplayer works. And I guess it's a good transition to talk about the multiplayer. I really loved that this game was multiplayer. The first demo was not multiplayer. However, it's the second demo, third demo, and the full game are all multiplayer, and I do really think it was implemented well. The online worked very well. There was a couple times when I had a friend that got kicked out. There was one, he said he got kicked out and he didn't know why. Then the second time, I think he said his game crashed. None of those things happened to me personally. I've played with multiple different friends, and I've even played with randoms, and it's never happened to me personally. But that is something you might need to be aware of if you're planning on getting the game. It could happen once or twice. However, it's not like the mission's compromised. You would still just be able to join right back in. So it still works pretty fine in my opinion. But honestly, in terms of design, it felt like this game was kind of designed to be played multiplayer. I'd say as far as the bosses go, I would really be confident in that. However, I do think there's something really nice about exploring the levels at your own pace. I'm not gonna lie, there were plenty of times throughout my multiplayer experience in this game that I felt like people went on without me while I'm trying to explore, or I felt like people couldn't go where they wanted to go because I was trying to go somewhere else. For me, when I play RPGs, when I get to a branching path or something, I was like, okay, seems like the way I want to go, but I'm going to go this way because there might be something back here. I always try to go the opposite of where I'm supposed to go in these games, personally, because I want to see if there's any logs back there, there's any treasure chests, any things like that. I like to just try to see what the developer's trying to hide in these levels. And I really do think, again, going back into the level design, they really cared about these levels. They really had a passion for developing these games. And you could tell the people behind it were fans of Final Fantasy because they really tried to pay tribute to the original locations while also giving people a reason to explore the levels. There were things to find. Sometimes there were cracked walls you could break down and find chests behind, Zelda style. I do think another thing, a few things about the gameplay that I would like to see tweaked if they ever made a sequel to this game, or maybe for Final Fantasy 16 or another action-based game or whatever. I do think a couple things they can take note from. One, for a game that drops these kind of drops and armor sets and all these things, I personally would prefer there to be a separation of menus, one to show what armor you're actually wearing. Like, say you like a particular set of armor. In this game, you can upgrade that armor to be better, but it takes a lot of resources to actually make it be able to keep up, because more often than not, I could upgrade my armor sets at the smithy, but more often than not, the next level was going to give me armor sets that was way better stat-wise than anything I could upgrade my previous one to. So, and that goes for the DLC weapons and stuff too, which is great for a while at the beginning, but at the same time, I was gonna, as I progressed, nothing I could upgrade those things to were gonna be better than what I was finding randomly from beating a regular enemy. So I would like there to be a separation similar to how Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition did it. There was the armor set I'm wearing and that be shown on the world and in cutscenes, and there was the armor set that was actually affecting my stats. I see no reason to, keep them mashed together like that, because more often than not, the JRPG trope is you pick up whatever's the strongest and you'll look silly doing it, but hey, I'm really strong. But I really liked it when Xenoblade really separated those two, so I could be really strong wearing silly armor, but I see the cool stuff in the overworld and in cutscenes, and I like that. It keeps it nice, simple, and consistent throughout the entire experience. I also feel like there is a lot of loot in this game. Dang near every enemy drops 3 to 5 pieces of loot. Sometimes you'll get 1 or 2, but this is per enemy, and a lot of times in these hordes, there's like 3 to 5, maybe even 6 enemies a lot of times. You're going to be getting a ton of loot, so dismantling things is vital in this game. You have to dismantle this stuff. And the reason for that is because you get materials you need to upgrade your armor sets. And again, I do think upgrading armor sets, despite, kind of feeling, not that important when you just go to the next level, I do think that you might as well upgrade what you're currently wearing and using when you go into that level, just so you have that little added extra bonus. Like, say if my weapon can get better benefits imbued with holy for this next level, I would go and add those points to it just so I can use that going into the next level, even if I would replace it during that level. So I do think that's the thing, but because there's so much loot, you'll be finding yourself pausing the game so many times throughout the level just to re-equip and change what you're currently wearing, because again, I can find stuff that's better. It's like, why not? I can find, like, I'm using a level 115 mace right now, but 2 minutes from now I find 100 level and 20, But then 2 minutes later, I find a level 120 mace. And so like, okay, well, I might as well replace it. Then maybe 10 minutes later from that, I find an even better one. It's a sword this time, and I just use that. Overall, you're going to be replacing everything you use a lot in this game. And I feel like, even though I like that a lot, I saw a lot of people saying they didn't like that, and I can kind of understand why now, because it's so much to go through. Me personally, I didn't mind dismantling it when I got full or getting close to full. I did it in between missions pretty frequently, and I just kept up with it. But you could literally just hold the triangle button and just scroll down, and it'll just select everything, and you could just press X to dismantle it all. It wasn't really an inconvenience, not really to me, and especially when it took less than a minute to really do, so I'm not too worried about it. And plus, I love the little prep time before missions. It kind of gives me those vibes I used to when I used to play Fire Emblem. And right before a mission starts, you really get your units together, make sure they got the items they need and all that kind of stuff. It feels like we're really setting out for a mission, and I like that kind of thing. And selling my stuff and getting materials and stuff was part of that process, and I was fine with that. But overall, I think that is the most of what I really had to say about this game. I really kind of thought about maybe I should make a couple videos out of Stranger of Paradise. I could upload some shorts. I was thinking about doing a spoiler-free video, which some people would really probably benefit from, especially since the game is just coming out today. But I decided against it because I do have to move on. Stranger of Paradise is a game that I'll likely still be streaming because I just love playing the game. It's fun, and it gives me a Final Fantasy multiplayer experience outside of 14 that I can play with friends. You know, as a Final Fantasy 14 fanboy, I kind of can't convince my friends all the time to just drop everything and get to the Shadowbringers and Endwalker content so we can play together and stuff. But I can't always do that. But Stranger of Paradise is a much easier game to get them into, and we can all just jump in and play together. And even if it's just for a mission or two, and I think that's fine. And I think it's a great game that any fan of Final Fantasy, even not just fans of Final Fantasy, anybody a fan of action games, I think would really enjoy this. Even if the story goes over your head, I think there's a lot of fun to be had. Even if you don't really get the context of why people are acting the way they are or why things are the way they are, I still think it overall leads to a fun time. And Twitter obviously sees that because the Twitter community kind of went from everybody thinking this game was going to be terrible to surprisingly loving everything about it. And it's crazy how 180s like that happen. For a long time, I felt like I was the only person on the planet Earth that was a fan of this thing, you know, because whenever I looked up about it, nobody was talking about it. Or I would just find my own tweets or find my own videos. So seeing tons of different memes and conversations and stuff about it, you know, is a really heartwarming thing to see. Right now, you can't really find too much of like the story explanations and, you know, in-game story discussions and stuff online right now because, again, the game just came out and the only people that had it ahead of time were people that got review copies and early access members. So other than that, there wasn't too much discussion to have. That's kind of why this video is 40 minutes long. I haven't had anybody else to really vent how I felt about this game too. But I really hope that those of you who watch this video were able to get something out of it. Maybe you found something I said was like-minded, or maybe you disagreed with something that I thought and it made you want to leave a comment. I would love either of those things purely because that increases interaction, and hey, I'll take any interaction I can get. You know, just don't be toxic, please. You know, opinionated, that's the thing about opinions. At the end of the day, we're all welcome to have them, and just because mine's different than yours doesn't necessarily mean that either one is wrong, because opinions can't be wrong. We need to tell ourselves that every time we feel like talking about them. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel if you love Final Fantasy. After this video, I'm planning on doing my Chrono Trigger video because of Chrono Cross will be out. I do plan on doing a Chrono Cross video as well. I want to do a retrospective for the Chrono series. Of course, that entails the visual novel game that they had that never actually was released over here, because that's the one I never actually played, Radical Dreamers. So I will be experiencing that for the first time. So other than that, outside of that, what can we expect next on the channel? The Final Fantasy retrospective. That's what I really want to do. I'm still wondering how I'm going to go about this. I'm wondering, should I split Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 up into their own individual videos? Or should I put them all in one video, like the Final Fantasy NES trilogy? Should I do something like that? I do feel like Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6 and all the games going forward kind of warrant their own videos, because their Final Fantasy 4 is when they really started trying to go more in depth with stories. So there's a bit more to say about those, especially with my experiences with them, as I have the least experience with the NES trilogy of the games. But let me know what you all think. I'll probably do a poll for that, just because I want to be sure on how to do it. I don't really like the idea of doing a retrospective series and having kind of collab multiple, you know, games in one video, especially for RPGs. But if it's easier to do so, easier for you guys to to actually take. If it's easier to accept the videos that way, and you don't have to wait 3 weeks for us to get, or 3 months to get to Final Fantasy IV or something like that, then I'm more than fine with doing that. But let me know, because Final Fantasy retrospective marathon is what I really want to do. It won't be the only marathon going on, as I do have plans to cover every Xenoblade game before Xenoblade 3. Will that end up happening? I have no idea. I would love for it to be the case, but as somebody who works, he does YouTube, and goes to school, all that kinds of stuff is a factor in these things. But let me know. I'd love to do all this stuff for you guys, and I'm really looking forward to it. Chrono Trigger is what I'm diving into next. I decided to push Final Fantasy VI back until I actually get to it in the retrospective. I have all the notes I need for it, so it's not like I'm going to forget about how I feel or anything like that, but it'll also give me time to kind of digest the story, a bit more. I feel like sometimes doing a video when you just finish something can sometimes make you not fully realize how you may feel about something. Like over time, like if I wait a week till after I beat the game, then I might think differently than I did when I just beat it. And that would allow me to be able to have a more genuine reaction to something instead of just being on the high of finishing it. At least that's how I feel. I mean, even though that's kind of what this video is. Maybe in a year from now I won't care for Stranger of Paradise as much as I did before. Maybe I won't see the same things I did today in the cutscenes as I will a year from now. Who knows? But after the next major marathon I also want to do at some point is a spin-off Final Fantasy marathon, where I'll probably tackle like the Dissidia games, maybe some of the Chocobo series, of course Stranger of Paradise as well. That would probably be the next time I tackle Stranger of Paradise in video form. So I think that will probably be pretty important as well. So I really do think it's about time somebody talks about those games, because I feel like Dissidia doesn't get talked about too much on the platforms nowadays. But that's going to be it for me for sure this time. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, if you enjoyed this video and you haven't already, please give it a like and subscribe. That way you can get more content from me. But thank you all so much for watching. My name is KingdomAce, and remember everyone to play some games, have some fun, and enjoy your day today.